I have the privilege of living in a house with 6 guys, and even though they're all heterosexual, they haven't really struggled with homosexuality at all, they still have an amazing sense of style. And so whenever I'm getting ready to speak, I'll employ one of my roommates, his name is Justin, to kind of help me pick out my wardrobe for when I'm getting ready to speak. I'll ask him to make me look heterosexual. So before I'm getting ready to speak, Justin will take me into his room and he'll open up his closet and we'll basically look through his clothes and he'll pick out a wardrobe for me. So whenever I speak, I always throw some kudos out to my roommate Justin for helping to make me look heterosexual, for helping to make me look good. So thanks to Justin. It's a lot of fun. It's a little game we call Straight Eye for the Ex-Gay Guy. We have a lot of fun with it. I was reading a story a while back about a family of 4 that was vacationing off the corner of the state of Maine. And there was a mom and a dad in the back seat, and there were 2 kids in the back seat. And this mom and the dad, they came to a sign that said that there was a nudist colony on the right. And, being that they had 2 impressionable young kids in the back seat, their first instinct was, well, if the nudist colony is to the right, we're going to take a left. Because they didn't want their kids to be exposed, for lack of a better word, to whatever nudity might just be around that corner, Let's get away from the nudity, right? It's usually a parent's instinct to get their kids as far away from nudity as possible. So they went the opposite direction of the nudist colony, and to their dismay, they ended up driving right past an entire family of 4, riding their bikes completely naked. And one of the little 8-year-old kids in the back seat, he reaches his hand out the window and he points at him and he says, "Look, Mommy, they're not wearing any safety helmets." I think this little boy in the back seat was kind of missing the main point. And I really believe that's what the Christian church has done with the issue of homosexuality. We become so entrenched with this idea that homosexuality is a sin that we've forgotten that homosexuals are people first, and that it's our job to demonstrate God's grace and love to the gay and lesbian community, not God's condemnation. I think a lot of times people get confused when we're ministering to people and we make homosexuality the point. Gay people don't need to be saved because they're gay. They just need to be saved because they're sinners in need of a Savior. Everything else is just a symptom. If the Christian church were to succeed at making gay people straight, but in the process we bypass the redemption issue, then all we'll end up with is hell full of straight people. And that's certainly not our goal. Well, I'd like to tell you guys my own story today, but I want to make it clear before I begin that when I tell you my own story, I'm really doing just that. I'm telling my own story. And the things that I talk about that were causal in my own homosexuality are things that apply to my own life, and things that are also prevalent in the lives of many people that I've ministered to who struggle with unwanted same-sex attractions. But to say something is prevalent doesn't mean it applies to everyone. So if there's somebody in the room who is gay or lesbian, or maybe you're struggling with homosexuality, and the things that I say don't quite seem to fit, I want you to know that I'm not trying to stereotype anybody or put anybody in a box. When I tell my own story, I'm telling my own story. And just because these things are prevalent in the lives of many of the people that I've ministered to who struggle with this, certainly doesn't mean that it's going to apply to every single person. And so I just want to be really clear about that. I'm not gay. 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 Those were the words that played themselves over and over and over again in my fragile pre-adolescent mind as I was growing up. Even as young as elementary school, I knew that something was different about me. When I reached adolescence, my body started telling me that I wanted sex from a man, but in my heart, I knew that it wasn't about sex. Even before adolescence, when I used to fantasize about certain men that I looked up to and respected, I didn't fantasize about sex. My fantasy was that a man that I viewed as a man, a real man, would wrap his arms around me and look me in the eye and tell me that I meant something to him. See, that was the emotional need that was driving my sexual desires. For me, homosexuality wasn't a sexual issue. Sex was just the symptom. Homosexuality was, at its core, an emotional deficit. That's why before hitting puberty, I didn't fantasize about sex from a man. I just wanted a hug, because the need hadn't become sexualized yet. Dr. Daryl Bem of Cornell University describes this term with the process exotic becomes erotic. He states that while growing up, boys need to identify with other boys and girls need to identify with other girls. By the time a child reaches adolescence, his or her own gender will seem familiar and boring, and attractions to the opposite sex will kick in. But if a child reaches puberty still curious about his or her own gender, this residual curiosity could become sexualized, and homosexual attractions may develop in this child. In short, what's happening is an emotional need is turning into an erotic sexual desire. This was certainly the case in my own life. In junior high and high school, I always felt like I was on the outside looking in, watching as other men connected with each other, somehow unable to figure out for myself how in the world they were doing it. To make matters worse, I had an emotionally distant but physically present father. He did his best to love me, but his love was overshadowed by periodic fits of rage when things didn't go his way. Because of my dad's lack of emotional stability, I never allowed myself to bond with him. Since I never really had a strong relationship with another man, the masculine gender as a whole seemed very mysterious to me. It almost seemed like other men were an alien life form. It seemed like masculinity was a well-kept secret that I wasn't allowed to know. I would look at other men and I would wonder, what's on the inside of a man? What's he like? What's his personality? What are his interests? What does he think about at 1 a.m? But since I never got to see what was on the inside of a man through relationship, I eventually became curious about what was on the outside of a man, his body. And I began to fantasize sexually about men. So you can see that what was going on in my own life here was an emotional need, an unmet emotional need, had morphed into an erotic sexual desire. I mentioned that I knew that I was struggling with homosexuality as young as elementary school. So when I hear gay and lesbian people say that they believe they were born gay because they've felt different for as long as they can remember, I believe them. I don't believe they were born gay, but I believe that they felt different for as long as they can remember, and so I understand why they believe they were born that way. Because I was very young when I realized that I was struggling with this. Now, the reason I don't believe people is born gay is because science hasn't really answered that question for us yet. In fact, rather than having to choose between a strictly genetic or strictly developmental view for the causation of homosexuality, it seems more likely that homosexual orientation is actually caused by a complex interaction between a person's genetic makeup and their environment. Now, when I say that genes can influence the development of homosexuality, I don't mean there's a single gene that causes homosexuality. What I'm talking about is temperament. Temperament is biologically influenced. It's influenced by our genes. Some boys may be born with a more sensitive and artistic temperament, whereas some boys may be born with a more masculine temperament, and they'd be more likely to go out for football and take machinery in high school. And if a boy is born with an artistic or sensitive temperament into a family with a football/machinist type father, the child could be predisposed to being rejected by his father and even his same-sex peers if he doesn't fit the mold for what a man is supposed to look like culturally. So that's what I mean by temperament. And so I have a chart that kind of makes this easier to understand. I want to credit Dr. David Blakeslee for this. A person's temperament is influenced by their genetic makeup, by their brain wiring, and by their prenatal hormone exposure. So those are the three things that influence temperament.